1 Samuel chapter 11, and I'm going to talk to you about King Saul. When Saul was anointed king, he was a very humble man. And I want to tell you the story of the Saul that Israel loved. Okay? Before he became corrupted by power, before he began to ignore the man of God, the same man who had anointed him king, he was loved. And this story will tell you why he was loved. The first official act of Saul as king was the rescue of Jabesh Gilead. Jabesh Gilead was on the other side of Jordan. So they were part of Israel that settled without crossing actually into the promised land. And they took their inheritance, part of their inheritance, over on the east bank. And so Jabesh Gilead is just over here, not too far from here. And if you'll remember from our travels the other day, Jezreel, the valley of Jezreel, the valley of Megiddo, is over in this direction. In fact, Gideon Spring, where we visited, forms the river called Harod, Ein Harod, and it actually flows just behind this mountain. So the stream where you were at, it flows right behind here, and then it goes into the Jordan River. So Jabesh Gilead, okay, Saul had just been anointed king. Nobody even knew he was king yet. He knew it. Samuel knew it. He hadn't told anybody. Then Nahash the Ammonite, now the Ammonite was from Ammon, what we today call Ammon, Jordan. That was the Ammonites. They lived over on that side. That's where Jordan is. We've been passing it. Nahash the Ammonite came up and camped against Jabesh Gilead. And all the men of Jabesh said unto Nahash, Make a covenant with us, and we will serve you. And Nahash answered and said, On this condition will I make a covenant with you, that I may thrust out all your right eyes, and lay it for a reproach upon all Israel. And the elders of Jabesh said unto him, Give us 7 days' respite, that we may send messengers unto all the coast of Israel. And then if there be no man to save us, we will come out to thee. Then came the messengers to Gibeah of Saul. Saul was in Gibeah. He was a Benjamite. That was very, very close to Jerusalem. So the messengers came to Saul and told the tidings in the ears of the people. And all the people lifted up their voices and wept. And behold, Saul came after the herd out of the field. And Saul said, What aileth the people that they weep? And they told him the tidings of the men of Jabesh. And the Spirit of God came upon Saul when he heard these tidings, and his anger was greatly kindled. And he took a yoke of oxen and hewed them in pieces and sent them, the pieces, throughout all the coast of Israel by the hands of messengers, saying, Whosoever cometh not forth after Saul and after Samuel, so shall it be done unto his oxen. And the fear of the Lord fell on the people, and they came out with one consent. And when he numbered them in Bezek, the children of Israel were 300,000, and the men of Judah 30,000. And they said unto the messengers that came, Thus shall ye say to the men of Jabesh Gilead, Tomorrow, by the time the sun be hot, you shall have help. And the messengers came and showed it to the men of Jabesh Gilead, and they were glad. Therefore the men of Jabesh said, Tomorrow we will come out unto you, and you shall do with us all that seemeth good unto you. And so on the morrow, Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the host in the morning watch, and slew the Ammonites until the heat of the day. And it came to pass that they which were remained were scattered, so that 2 of them were not left together. And the people said unto Samuel, Who is he that said, Shall Saul reign over us? Bring them in, that we may put them to death. And Saul said, There shall not a man be put to death this day. For today the Lord hath wrought salvation in Israel. Then said Samuel to the people, Come, let us go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there. And all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. And there they sacrificed sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord. And there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. That was Saul's first act. Can you understand why the people loved him? Especially the people of Jabesh Gilead. Now, 40 years later, we come to this sad story. Now the Philistines fought against Israel, and the men of Israel fled from before the Philistines and fell down slain in Mount Gilboa. That's just over here. Mount Gilboa is right over here, and it wraps around to where we were at the foot of the mountain at Gideon Spring. And the Philistines followed hard upon Saul and upon his sons, and the Philistines slew Jonathan and Abinadab and Melchishua, Saul's sons. And the battle went sore against Saul, and the archers hit him, and he was sore wounded of the archers. Then said Saul unto his armor-bearer, Draw thy sword, and thrust me through therewith, lest these uncircumcised come and thrust me through and abuse me. But his armor-bearer would not, for he was sore afraid. Therefore Saul took a sword and fell upon it. And when his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell likewise upon his sword and died with him. So Saul died, and his 3 sons, and his armor-bearer, and all his men that same day together. And when the men of Israel that were on the other side of the valley, and they that were on the other side of Jordan, saw that the men of Israel fled, and that Saul and his sons were dead, they forsook the cities and fled, and the Philistines came and dwelt in them. And it came to pass on the morrow, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, that they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen in Mount Gilboa. And they cut off his head, and they stripped off his armor, and sent into the land of the Philistines round about to publish it in the house of their idols and among the people. And they put his armor in the house of Ashtaroth, and they fastened his body to the wall of Beit She'an. Beit She'an at that time was on top of this hill. The house of Ashtaroth, their temple, was on top of that hill, and the walls of Beit She'an were around the perimeter of that hill. It was a small town at that time. And when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead, the men, the sons, the grandsons that Saul had rescued 40 years earlier, when the inhabitants of Jabesh Gilead heard of that which the Philistines had done to Saul, all the valiant men arose and went all night and took the body of Saul and the bodies of his sons from the wall of Beit She'an, and came to Jabesh and burnt them there. And they took their bones and buried them under the tree at Jabesh, and fasted 7 days. To these men, to these people, what Saul had become really didn't make a difference. They remembered what he used to be. They remembered what he had done for them. And so they risked their own lives to climb that mountain. Now imagine that. There were defenders up there. They climbed that mountain at night and took the bodies of Saul and his sons off the walls of the city on the top of that hill and carried them back to their home. When David heard the news that Saul, the man who had hunted him, was dead, David lamented with this lamentation over Saul and over Jonathan his son. Also, he bade them teach the children of Judah the use of the bow. Behold, it is written in the book of Jasher. David said, "The beauty of Israel is slain upon thy high places. How are the mighty fallen? Tell it not in Gath, publish it not in the streets of Askelon. Let the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the Philistines rejoice, lest the daughters of the uncircumcised triumph. Ye mountains of Gilboa, let there be no dew, neither let there be rain upon you, nor fields of offerings, for there the shield of the mighty is vilely cast away, the shield of Saul, not anointed with oil. From the blood of the slain, from the fat of the mighty, the bow of Jonathan turned not back, and the sword of Saul returned not empty. Saul and Jonathan were lovely and pleasant in their lives, and in their death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. You daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you in scarlet with other delights, who put on you ornaments of gold upon your apparel. How are the mighty fallen in the midst of the battle? O Jonathan, thou wast slain in thy high places. I am distressed for thee, my brother Jonathan. Very pleasant thou hast been unto me. Thy love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women. How are the mighty fallen, and the weapons of war perished. So this was the end of Saul. 40 years he reigned over Israel. He started humbly. He started heroic. He started as a good man. He was anointed of God. And at his end, those that he had helped did not forget him. That's where his body was hung. That's where the body of Jonathan was hung, and the two other sons of Saul. And the men of Jabesh Gilead, which we're going to pass at least the vicinity a little later as we drive down the Jordan Valley. It will be on the left-hand side. They came here and got the bodies of those that they owed a debt of gratitude to.